On the 13th of September, 1946, in the yard of Montelupich prison in Krakow, the hangman placed the noose and got it wrong. The rope was too short. They had to do it again. The man on the gallows was Amon Göth, the commandant who once shot prisoners from his balcony for sport. This is how the Butcher of Płaszów finally met his verdict, and why even his death did not go to plan. Amon Leopold Göth was born in Vienna on December 11, 1908. His family was comfortable, respectable, and devoutly Catholic. His father owned a profitable publishing house, Verlagsanstalt Amon Franz Göth, which produced religious literature and military history. Young Amon grew up in an environment of relative privilege, raised primarily by his aunt, while his parents ran the office. He was an average student, quiet and disciplined, showing no early signs of the extreme violence that would later define his life. As the economic crisis of the late 1920s forced the family business toward liquidation, Göth sought a new source of authority. At 17, he joined the Heimwehr, a right-wing youth paramilitary. In September 1930, at 21 years old, he made a conscious, defining choice. He formally registered with the Austrian branch of the Nazi Party, receiving membership number 510,764, and enlisted in the SS. This was years before the German annexation of Austria, a time when being a Nazi in Vienna carried real political risk. Göth smuggled weapons, money, and intelligence across the border, eventually fleeing to Munich to escape a police investigation into a suspected explosives conspiracy. Rather than being swept up by a historic tide, Göth actively chose his path. He was a true believer who sought out the SS, aligning himself with its racial doctrine long before he held the power of life and death. In 1940, a brief conscription into a Wehrmacht logistics unit in France ended after 6 months with Göth's permanent transfer to the SS Totenkopfverbände. By early 1942, this transfer placed him at the heart of Operation Reinhard in Lublin, the administrative center for the systematic extermination of Polish Jewry. Under the direct authority of Odilo Globoknik and Christian Wirth, Göth was promoted to SS Untersturmführer. He was tasked with managing the logistics of death, coordinating the transport trains that sent thousands of families from the Krakow district to the gas chambers of Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec. His rise was orderly, bureaucratic, and highly efficient. On May 15, 1942, Göth attended a command briefing with Globoknik to plan the destruction of the Krakow region's Jewish population. Here, his authority became directly linked to the machinery of mass murder. He was an empowered functionary, a willing cog in a state-sponsored slaughterhouse, climbing the ranks of the SS through the clinical organization of human destruction. At 6 o'clock on the morning of March 13, 1943, the planning became reality. Under Göth's direct command, SS Sturmbrigade II and auxiliary police cordoned off the Krakow Ghetto. Over the next 48 hours, the streets of the Podgorz district turned into an open slaughterhouse. Göth ordered his men to shoot any adult male who tried to flee, while he coordinated the terror. By the end of March 14, SS forces had executed approximately 2,000 Jews in the streets. They forced another 3,500 survivors out of their homes, marching them straight into the newly built barracks of Plaszow or onto transport trains bound for Auschwitz-Birkenau. For Göth, this was the moment his career translated into open, lethal violence, transforming the survivors into the first inmates of his absolute domain. Göth had assumed command of Plaszow in February 1943. He ran the camp as his own fiefdom rather than an impersonal institution. From the balcony of his villa overlooking the yard, he established a routine of random, recreational violence. Survivors like Leon Goldstein and Samuel Klein later testified that Göth would stand on the terrace with a rifle, firing at prisoners who simply caught his eye. He kept trained German shepherds, releasing them to attack inmates working in the kitchens and barracks, using the dogs as instruments of terror. These killings were deliberate and recreational, entirely separate from bureaucratic orders. Witnesses described a man who played with the power of life and death for his own amusement, often shooting prisoners before starting his breakfast. For the inmates, survival did not depend on hard work or following the rules. This arbitrary sadism ensured that everyone who entered Plaszow lived under the constant threat of a single man's whim, knowing that any moment could be their last. Inside Plaszow, terror served a secondary purpose: systematic enrichment. While prisoners starved on basic rations, Göth built a life of lavish comfort. He systematically confiscated gold, jewelry, and family heirlooms from those entering the camp, amassing assets estimated at 1.5 million Reichsmarks. His personal villa featured a private wine cellar, a Mercedes-Benz parked outside, and regular alcohol-fueled dinners for visiting SS officers. At the center of this domestic excess was Ruth Irene Calder, a Czech-German woman who became his mistress in early 1943. Calder lived in the villa, surrounded by these stolen goods, managing a household staffed by enslaved Jewish workers. Investigators later traced 342 parcels of looted property sent from the camp directly under her name. Göth turned mass murder into a highly profitable private enterprise, demonstrating how terror and theft operated in tandem. But this personal fortune was dangerous. SS regulations decreed that all confiscated Jewish property belonged strictly to the state. By keeping these riches for himself, Göth committed a crime that even his own organization would not ignore. In September 1944, the SS Economic and Administrative Office arrested Göth. His fall came through bureaucratic rejection, not moral awakening. The charges were theft, embezzlement, and violating SS rules on prisoner treatment. Göth had crossed the regime's perverse boundaries, hoarding wealth meant for Berlin and executing workers needed for the war. The SS held him under investigation in a Krakow psychiatric hospital until the regime collapsed. In May 1945, American forces captured Göth. Within months, they extradited him to Poland to answer for Plaszow. On August 27, 1946, the Supreme National Tribunal convened in the Krakow District Court to hear case number 146. The prosecution indicted Göth on charges of genocide, economic plunder, and the direct murder of tens of thousands of people at Plaszow and during the liquidations of the Krakow and Tarnow ghettos. Standing before the judges, Göth denied personal responsibility, portraying himself as a mere subordinate carrying out state orders. But his defense collapsed when survivors took the stand. Witnesses like Samuel Klein and Leon Goldstein recounted his arbitrary killings, stripping away his bureaucratic shield and exposing the intimate, sadistic reality of his rule. The Supreme National Tribunal found Göth guilty on all counts and sentenced him to death. On September 13, 1946, guards led him to the gallows at Montelupich prison in Krakow. The executioner misjudged the rope, botching the first attempt before a subsequent hanging ended Göth's life. Before the trapdoor fell, he reportedly offered a final Nazi salute. His body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered into the Vistula River, leaving no grave. Decades later, Ralph Fiennes' portrayal in Schindler's List fixed Göth in popular memory, turning his balcony killings into a definitive image of Nazi terror. No physical rope can balance the ledger of his atrocities. Today, Göth's legacy remains a stark warning. The deepest evil always begins with ordinary, everyday choices. That is the chilling truth we must never forget. Join the conversation in the comments below.